The first thing I noticed was not the cake. It was my husband's face. He had been laughing beside the kitchen island 1 second earlier, holding a paper plate in one hand, while my best friend told a ridiculous story about us getting lost on a college road trip. Then the front door opened, and his mother walked in carrying a white bakery box tied with a gold ribbon. The laughter left his face before she even set the box down. That should have warned me. My name is Claire Bennett. I was turning 38 that night, and for the first time in years, I had agreed to let people make a fuss over me. It was not a fancy party. We lived outside Columbus, Ohio, in a brick house with a narrow backyard and a kitchen that always felt too small when more than 6 people stood in it. My husband, Daniel, had invited a few close friends, my younger sister, 2 neighbors, and his parents. My 12-year-old daughter, Lily, had hung silver streamers across the living room. Daniel had ordered Italian food from my favorite restaurant. Someone had opened a bottle of red wine, and an old playlist from our wedding was playing through a speaker on the counter. It felt warm, safe, normal. Then Vivian arrived. My mother-in-law never entered a room quietly. She did not need to raise her voice. She carried attention with her like perfume. She wore a cream-colored coat, pearl earrings, and the pleasant smile she used when other people were watching. "Sorry I'm late," she said. The bakery was an absolute disaster. She gave Daniel a kiss on the cheek. She gave me a quick hug that barely touched my shoulders. Then she placed the cake box in the center of the island. "I wanted to handle dessert myself," she announced. That was strange. Vivian had never volunteered to do anything for my birthday before. In 6 years of marriage, she had forgotten it twice, sent flowers to Daniel's office once, and mailed me a card with my name spelled wrong. Still, I smiled. "That was thoughtful," I said. She looked directly at me. "I do try." Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. Daniel moved closer to the box. His jaw had gone stiff. His father, Robert, stood near the refrigerator with a drink in his hand. He did not look surprised. He looked tired. Vivian untied the ribbon slowly. People gathered around because people always gather around a birthday cake. Lily came to stand beside me. My sister raised her phone, ready to take a picture. Vivian lifted the lid. For half a second, nobody reacted. The cake was beautiful. White frosting, fresh strawberries, thin gold decorations around the edges. Then I read the message written across the center in dark red icing. "Happy Bulad Melissa." Melissa was Daniel's ex-wife. The room became so quiet that I could hear the soft pop of the speaker changing songs. My sister lowered her phone. Lily looked up at me. Daniel stared at the cake as if it had insulted him personally. Vivian put one hand over her mouth. "Oh my goodness," she said. Her voice was perfect. Too perfect. "This must be a mistake." No one answered. She looked around the room, waiting for someone to rescue her. "I gave the baker your name, Claire." "I absolutely did. They must have mixed up the order." I kept staring at the icing. Melissa was not a common name in Daniel's life. It was not the name of Vivian's neighbor, her hairdresser, or some random woman from church. It belonged to the woman she had compared me to for 6 years. Melissa cooked better. Melissa dressed more elegantly. Melissa understood family traditions. Melissa never brought another man's child into Daniel's life. That last comment had been said only once, but once was enough. Lily had been 9 years old at the time. Daniel had confronted Vivian. Vivian had cried. Robert had asked everyone to calm down. 2 weeks later, the family acted as though nothing had happened. That was how Vivian survived every cruelty. She made the wound, then waited for everyone else to become embarrassed by the blood. I looked at her smiling face, and something cold moved through me. But before I could speak, Daniel stepped forward. "No," he said. His mother blinked. "No what?" "No, it wasn't a mistake." The room shifted. Vivian's smile disappeared for a fraction of a second. Then it came back. "Daniel, please. Don't create drama at Claire's party." He picked up the bakery receipt taped beneath the box. Vivian's hand moved toward him. Too late. Daniel unfolded it. He read silently. Then he turned the paper around. The name on the order was clearly printed. Melissa. The pickup name was also printed. Vivian Bennett. My heart began beating harder. Daniel looked at his mother. "You ordered it this way." Vivian's face changed. Not much, but I saw it. The surprise was gone. The embarrassment was gone. What remained was irritation. "You're making a scene over frosting," she said. My sister whispered, "Unbelievable." Vivian heard her. "I said it was an error." Daniel held up the receipt. "This says otherwise." Robert finally spoke. "Vivian, maybe we should go." She turned on him with a look sharp enough to cut glass. Then she faced me. "I suppose you think I did this to hurt you." I did not answer immediately. For years I had been careful with her. I had chosen polite words, soft boundaries, and private conversations. I had swallowed insults because I loved Daniel and did not want to become the reason he lost his family. But there was my name missing from my own cake. There was my daughter watching. There were my friends standing in stunned silence. And there was Vivian still expecting me to protect her from the consequences of what she had done. So, I smiled. No, I said. I think you did it, because you believed Daniel would defend you. Her eyes moved toward him. That was when I understood. This was not only an attack on me. It was a test for him. She wanted to prove that no matter what she did, her son would still make excuses. He would still pull me aside later and say she was difficult, lonely, damaged, or scared. He would still ask me to let it go. But Daniel did not look at me. He looked at his mother. And in a voice so calm that it frightened me, he said, "Not anymore." Vivian went still. Daniel took the cake, carried it to the trash can, and dropped it inside. The entire cake, box, candles, strawberries, gold ribbon, and Melissa's name. Vivian gasped. That cost $80. Daniel closed the trash lid. Then consider it the price of your last warning. No one moved. Vivian looked from him to me. You're choosing her over your own mother. Daniel's answer came quickly. I'm choosing my wife over someone who keeps trying to destroy my marriage. Her face went white. Then she laughed. It was a small, ugly sound. You have no idea what your wife has been hiding from you. My stomach dropped. Daniel frowned. What are you talking about? Vivian picked up her purse. For the first time that night, she looked pleased. Ask Claire why Melissa called me last week. Then she walked out. The party ended 20 minutes later. No one wanted to leave, but no one knew how to stay. My sister offered to take Lily home with her for the night. I agreed because I could see the questions building in my daughter's eyes, and I was not ready to answer them. After the front door closed, Daniel and I stood alone in the kitchen. The trash can smelled like strawberries and sugar. He leaned against the counter. Did you know Melissa called my mother? No. It was the truth. He watched me carefully. Have you spoken to her? Never. Another truth. Melissa had been gone from Nar's life for nearly 9 years. Their marriage had lasted less than 3. They had no children, no shared business, and no reason to stay in contact. At least, that was what I had always believed. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. I'm sorry. For which part? All of it. I wanted to be angry at him. A part of me was. Not because of the cake, but because Vivian had been allowed to reach this point one insult at a time. Yet when I looked at him, I did not see a weak husband trying to avoid conflict. I saw a man who had finally opened a door he had kept locked since childhood. What did she mean? I asked. I don't know. Do you believe her? He looked at me immediately. No. Then he paused. But I believe she wants us to think there's something to find. That distinction mattered. We cleaned the kitchen in silence. At midnight, Daniel took the bakery receipt from the trash and flattened it on the counter. Why keep that? I asked. Because tomorrow she'll tell everyone she never ordered it. He was right. By 9 the next morning, Vivian had already called 3 relatives. According to her version, the bakery had made a terrible mistake. Daniel had screamed at her, thrown away an expensive cake, and humiliated her in front of strangers. I had stood there smiling, because I had spent years turning him against his family. By noon, Daniel's aunt called to say Vivian was too upset to eat. At 1, a cousin texted him family is family. At 2, Robert left a voicemail asking Daniel to apologize, so everyone could move forward. Daniel listened without expression. Then he blocked 3 numbers. I had never seen him do that before. The real problem arrived at 4 in the afternoon. An email appeared in my inbox from an address I did not recognize. The subject line "Codknotatlnl." My hands went cold. Inside was one sentence. Ask your husband why his first marriage really ended. Below it was an attachment. A photograph. It showed Daniel standing outside a motel room with Melissa. The date in the corner was 7 years earlier, 1 year after their divorce. My vision blurred. I enlarged the image. Daniel looked younger, thinner, and exhausted. Melissa stood close to him. Her hand was pressed against his chest. The picture did not show a kiss. It did not need to. It looked intimate enough to make my mind fill in everything else. Daniel came home 40 minutes later. I had not replied to the email. I had not called anyone. I had spent the entire time walking from the living room to the kitchen and back again. When he saw my face, he dropped his keys on the table. What happened? I turned the laptop toward him. He looked at the photograph. All the color left his face. That frightened me more than denial would have. You know this picture? I said. Yes, the word came out quietly. I crossed my arms because my hands were shaking. Then explain it. He sat down. For several seconds, he said nothing. Finally, he pointed at the motel door. That was not a motel where we stayed together. It was where she was living. Why? Because after the divorce, she lost her apartment. That does not explain why you were there. She called me. Why? He looked at the floor. She said she was going to hurt herself. The anger inside me stumbled. Daniel continued. Melissa had problems before we married. depression, panic attacks, drinking. My mother knew some of it but thought marriage would fix her. After I left, Melissa got worse. One night she called and said she had taken pills. What did you do? I drove there. I called an ambulance. She had not taken anything. She wanted me to come back. I stared at the photograph. Who took the picture? I don't know. Did your mother know about that night? His head lifted slowly. Yes, there it was. The connection. Vivian had known where Daniel was. Maybe she had followed him. Maybe Melissa had sent the photograph. Either way, she had kept it for 7 years. Waiting, Daniel looked sick. I should have told you. Less. I was ashamed. Why? You tried to help someone. Because I kept helping her for months. I felt another crack open beneath my feet. How many months? 4. He began talking quickly, like a man who knew slow answers would sound like lies. He had paid part of Melissa's rent. He had driven her to counseling twice. He had answered late-night phone calls because she threatened to disappear. Vivian encouraged it, telling him it was his responsibility because he had abandoned his wife. Ex-wife, I said. I know. Did you sleep with her? No. Did you kiss her? No. Did you want to go back? No. Then why hide it from me? Because when we met, I wanted that part of my life buried. I thought it was finished. I turned away. The photograph was not proof of an affair. But the secrecy hurt. It made me wonder what else existed outside the story I had been told. Daniel stood. You can ask me anything. I don't know what to ask yet. That night, neither of us slept. The next morning, I opened the email again and studied the address. It was a string of letters and numbers, but the attachment contained a file name. VMB 2019 de Arfi Ividone 4. VMB Vivian Monet. Maybe coincidence. Maybe not. I forwarded everything to my friend Tasha, who worked in digital security for a bank. I did not ask her to hack anyone. I only asked whether the email contained identifying information. 2 hours later, she called. The email came through a privacy service, she said. But the photograph was edited recently. What do you mean? The image is old, but someone opened and saved a new copy 3 days ago. The day before my birthday. My skin prickled. Can you tell where? No. But there's something else. The photo has been cropped. She sent me an adjusted version showing the faint outline of missing space on the right side. Someone had deliberately removed part of the image. I asked Daniel whether he read anyone else being there that night. He closed his eyes. Yes. Ooh. My mother. The room went silent. He said Vivian had arrived before the ambulance left. She had spent 20 minutes comforting Melissa. Then she had screamed at Daniel in the parking lot for destroying a fragile woman. She told me I had to take care of Melissa until she recovered. Did she take the picture? I never saw a camera. But the answer was obvious. Vivian had not only kept an old photograph, she had cropped herself out of it. Daniel wanted to confront her immediately. I stopped him. For once, let's not give her time to rewrite the story, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. That decision changed everything. We began with the bakery. The manager remembered Vivian because she had corrected the spelling of Melissa's name twice. She had also asked whether dark red icing would photograph clearly. Daniel stood beside me as the manager explained this. His expression did not change, but I saw his hand close into a fist. We asked for a copy of the signed order. The manager provided it. Next, Daniel called Melissa. He had not spoken to her in years. I sat across from him at the dining table while the phone rang. She answered on the 4th ring. Daniel. Her voice sounded cautious, not surprised. He put the call on speaker. My mother says you contacted her. A long pause. I did? Why? Because she contacted me first. Daniel and I looked at each other. Melissa continued. She called me 2 months ago. She said you were unhappy. She said Claire was controlling you and keeping you away from the family. I almost laughed. The lie was so predictable that it felt rehearsed. Daniel asked, what did she want? Ate first. She said she only wanted to know how I was doing. Then she started talking about the past. The photograph. Another pause. Yes. Did you send it to her? No. She took it. Confirmation. Melissa's voice grew unsteady. She followed you that night. I saw her outside. After the ambulance left, she came into my room and told me you still loved me. Daniel closed his eyes. She told me you came because you wanted another chance, Melissa said. I believed her for a while. I felt anger rise, but not toward Melissa. What happened after that? I asked. She was silent. Then she said, Vivian kept us connected. The story came out piece by piece. Vivian had encouraged Melissa to call Daniel. When Daniel stopped answering, Vivian gave Melissa his work schedule. She told Melissa where he went to the gym. She even suggested places where they might, accidentally, meet. Melissa admitted she had followed the advice. She also admitted she had been unstable and desperate. But Vivian had fed that desperation because she wanted Daniel back in the marriage she had chosen for him. Why contact her now? I asked. Because she called me again? Melissa said. She said Daniel was finally ready to admit he made a mistake. Daniel's face hardened. She wanted me to come to Claire's birthday party. My breath stopped. What? She said there would be a moment when everyone would understand that was still part of the family. I told her no. I'm married now. I have a child. I don't want anything to do with this. Daniel asked. Did she mention the cake? Less. The word landed like a stone. She said the cake would open the door. I thought she was speaking metaphorically. For the first time since my birthday, I felt real fear. Vivian had not planned a cruel joke. She had planned a scene. She wanted to put Melissa's name in front of everyone, create tension, then bring Melissa into the room like a ghost from Daniel's past. But Melissa had refused, so Vivian used the cake alone. Why did you call her last week? I asked. To tell her to stop contacting me. She got angry. She said I owed her because she supported me after the divorce. Daniel's voice became cold. Do you have messages? Less? Send them. Within minutes, my phone filled with screenshots. Vivian's words were unmistakable. Claire is not permanent. Daniel has always confused responsibility with love. A man eventually returns to the woman who knew him first. The most disturbing message came last. Come to the party. Wear the blue dress. He always liked you in blue. Daniel stood so suddenly that his chair fell backward. I had never seen that look on his face. Not rage, disgust, as if he had finally seen the full shape of the person he had spent his life calling mom. Still, one question remained. Why now? Vivian had disliked me from the beginning, but her recent behavior was more desperate and organized. Something had changed. The answer came from Robert. He appeared at our house the next evening without calling. He looked 10 years older than he had at the party. Daniel almost refused to let him in. Robert raised both hands. I'm not here to defend her. We sat in the living room. Robert stared at the floor for a long time before speaking. Your mother has been moving money. Daniel frowned. What money? My retirement accounts. The home equity line. Savings. My stomach tightened. Robert explained that Vivian had lost nearly $140,000 over 18 months through online investments and secret loans to a man she met in a private financial group. She believed the man was a successful advisor. He was a scammer. When Robert discovered the losses, he told her he wanted a legal separation. Vivian panicked. She had always treated Daniel as her emotional safety net. Now she expected him to become her financial one as well. But Daniel and I had recently started a small construction consulting company. Business was improving, yet nearly every dollar was tied up in equipment, payroll, and loans. Vivian did not know that. She only saw the new office, the company truck, and the photographs from our first major contract. She thinks you're rich, Robert said. Daniel stared at him. She tried to destroy my marriage because she wants money. Robert shook his head. It's more complicated than that. She thinks Claire is the reason you will say no. Of course she did. In Vivian's world, Daniel never made choices she disliked. Someone always controlled him. First his father, then Melissa, then me. Robert reached into his coat and placed a small key on the coffee table. There's a locked file cabinet in the basement. She keeps documents there. I found the key yesterday. Daniel did not touch it. What documents? I don't know. But after the party, she moved the cabinet into the storage room and told me never to open it. We should have called a lawyer first. We should have handled everything slowly and carefully. Instead, Daniel drove to his parents' house with Robert while I waited at home. 2 hours later, he returned carrying a thick brown envelope. Inside were copies of our company registration, estimates of our house value, details from Daniel's business website, and handwritten notes about our income. There were also draft letters. One was addressed to Daniel. It described Vivian as an abandoned mother facing homelessness because her son's wife had isolated him. Another was addressed to members of their church. A third was a proposed social media post asking friends and family for financial support. At the bottom of one page, Vivian had written, if Daniel refuses, public pressure may force him to help. But the final document was worse. It was a copy of a loan application with Daniel's name listed as a co-borrower. The signature looked like his. It was not. The forged loan application changed the situation from family drama into a legal matter. Daniel contacted an attorney the next morning. The lender confirmed that an online application had been started, but not completed because additional identity verification was required. Vivian had Daniel's social security number from old tax documents. She knew his birth date, employment history, and previous addresses. She had almost everything she needed. Her plan became clear. If Daniel returned to her side, she would ask him to help with the debt. If he refused, she would shame him publicly. If shame failed, she would try to attach his name to a loan. and she believed I was the obstacle standing between her and his obedience. Daniel sat in the attorney's office with both hands clasped in front of him. "I want to report it," he said. The attorney nodded. "Once you do, you may not control what happens next." "I understand." He looked at me. For years, I had feared this moment. I had imagined he might blame me, hesitate, or ask for one more chance because she was his mother. Instead, he said, "I should have stopped protecting her a long time ago." The investigation began quietly. The lender preserved the online records. The bakery supplied the signed order. Melissa agreed to provide her messages. Robert turned over financial documents showing the hidden transfers. Vivian knew none of this. She believed silence meant victory. 1 week after my birthday, she announced that she was holding a family dinner. She invited everyone who had been at my party, plus several relatives who had heard only her version. The invitation said she wanted to clear the air with honesty and love. Daniel showed me the message. "Do you want to go?" he asked. "No, neither do I." Then his attorney called. The investigator wanted Vivian available at a known place and time. So we went. The dinner was held at Vivian and Robert's house on a Sunday evening. When we arrived, cars filled the driveway. Inside, at least 20 people stood around the dining room, pretending not to stare at us. Vivian wore a navy dress and pearls. She looked casual and carefully wounded. On the table sat another cake. This one said "Familydrama Farver." I almost admired the performance. Almost. Vivian greeted Daniel as though he had come home from war. "I knew you would come." He did not hug her. "We came to listen." She led everyone into the living room. Robert stood near the window, silent. Vivian began with tears. She said the bakery had made an error. She said I had always hated her. She said Daniel had been manipulated into rejecting the woman who gave him life. Then she spoke about the financial trouble, not the scam, not the forged loan, only the cruel fact that Robert was threatening to leave her when she was vulnerable. Several relatives looked sympathetic. Vivian pressed a tissue to her eyes. "I am not asking for money," she said. "That was a lie. I am asking for compassion." Another lie. "And I am asking my son to remember who his real family is." Daniel stood. The room became quiet. Vivian looked hopeful. He walked to the dining table and placed a bakery receipt beside the cake. "This is the order from Claire's birthday." Vivian's expression tightened. "It proves you requested Melissa's name." She waved one hand. "We have discussed this." "No, you have lied about it." He placed the screenshots from Melissa beside the receipt. "You contacted my ex-wife. You asked her to come to my wife's birthday party. You told her Claire was temporary." A whispers moved through the room. Vivian's face hardened. "Melissa is unstable. You know that." Daniel placed the uncropped motel photograph on the table. "You used her instability for years. You followed me to that motel. You took this picture. Then you cropped yourself out and sent it to Claire." Vivian looked at me. For 1 second, I saw pure hatred. "You cannot prove I sent anything." Daniel nodded. "You're right. That part may take time." Then he placed the loan application on the table. "But this won't." Robert closed his eyes. Vivian stared at the paper. Her lips parted. No sound came out. Daniel continued. "You used my identity to begin a loan application." "I did no such thing." The lender preserved the device information. That was not the whole truth. The investigation was still ongoing. But Vivian did not know what they had. Her eyes moved toward the hallway. That was when 2 investigators stepped through the open front door with a uniformed officer behind them. No one spoke. One investigator asked, "Vivian Bennett." She stood frozen. "We need to speak with you regarding suspected identity theft, attempted financial fraud, and several unauthorized transfers." Vivian looked around the room. The same room where she had planned to make herself the victim. The same relatives she had called. The same family she believed she could control with tears. No one stepped forward. She turned to Daniel. "Tell them this is a misunderstanding." His face broke then. Not with weakness grief. She still did not understand. Even now, she believed he would save her. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "No." Her voice rose. "I am your mother." And Daniel's answer was quiet. "And I was your son, not your husband, not your therapist, not your bank, not your weapon." She began crying. Real tears this time. But real tears do not erase real harm. The investigators did not handcuff her in front of everyone. They asked her to come with them for questioning. She protested, demanded a lawyer, and accused Robert of setting her up. Then she pointed at me. This is what she wanted. I finally spoke. "No, Vivian. What I wanted was my name on my own birthday cake." The room went still. "You did everything after that yourself." She looked at me as if she wanted to say something cruel enough to destroy me. But there was nothing left. Her secrets were already on the table. Her audience had seen the whole performance collapse. She left between the officer and one investigator. The front door closed. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then my sister walked into the dining room, picked up the cake knife, and scraped the words Famail is faravar from the frosting. She looked at me. Cake. I laughed. I could not help it. It was the first real laugh I had felt in weeks. The legal process took months. Vivian eventually accepted a plea agreement, related attempted identity fraud, and unauthorized financial activity. She avoided prison, but she received probation, mandatory financial counseling, restitution obligations, and a protective order that prevented her from contacting us. Robert filed for divorce. He sold the house and moved into a small condo near Dayton. Melissa sent one final message apologizing for her role in Daniel's past. We wished her well and closed that chapter. Daniel started therapy. Not because he was broken, but because he was tired of carrying a childhood that had never belonged on his shoulders. Lily noticed the change before I did. One night, she said, Daniel laughs more now. She was right. Peace did not arrive dramatically. It came in small things. A phone that no longer rang with accusations. Holidays without silent tension. Dinner conversations that did not end with someone apologizing for Vivian. 3 months after my birthday, Daniel brought home a small cake from the same bakery. There was no party. Just the three of us at the kitchen table. The cake said HPPY BRHDI, Hlir, Billetide, Bat Karak. I laughed until I cried. Daniel lit one candle. Lily made me wear the silver paper crown she had saved from the party. Before I blew out the flame, Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. I'm sorry it took me so long, he said. I knew what he meant. Not the cake, not the photograph, not even the forged application. He meant the years he spent believing that protecting his mother from consequences was the same as loving her. I squeezed his hand. You stopped when it mattered. He shook his head. No, I stopped when I finally understood that protecting her meant sacrificing you. I looked at my daughter, my husband, and the correctly spelled name in front of me. Then, I blew out the candle. Vivian had tried to erase me with another woman's name. Instead, she exposed every lie she had written over our lives. And in the end, the name she could not erase was mine.